Thanks, everyone. Now we have one more fireside chat and then another coffee break. So bear with us and call your friends if they're outside, because this is another very, very interesting fireside chat that we are offering you, or actually brought to you by Coinbase, one of our very active members, also board members. And again, we go back to MiCA. As you thought that we were done with MiCA, of course not. We still talk a bit about MiCA. This time, again, we look at MiCA from a bit of more of a international context, right? So we want to see how are other jurisdictions looking at MiCA, and also how is this comparing in the international regulatory context. So for this conversation, we're going to have a great moderator, and please join me in welcoming her on stage, Kristina Lucrezia, Global Head of Strategy and Partnership at Exponential Science. Thank you. Welcome. And our guest star, I guess, speaker from Coinbase, Vice President for International Policy, Duff. Welcome, Tom. Great to have you back. Thanks so much, guys. Yes, on this side. One last big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tommaso, and thank you very much for organizing this amazing fireside chat. I'm super excited, and I have like 100 questions, but let's focus on what we have time for. But before delving into MiCA, I would love to talk a little bit about Tom. So let me start with a personal question. You have incredible, very impressive experience in fintech, financial institutions, policy making, regulations, advisory. But your education is related to languages. And this is something that also caught my attention a lot, because I'm also a philologist, and I also get this question quite a lot. How does it relate to fintech? How does it help you in your job?
I was worried you were going to ask me to speak in foreign languages as a way of kind of testing that, which would have been difficult. But look, it's great to be here, and it sounds like it's between us and coffee. So we'll try and make this fun. So I did languages, yeah. I did French and Spanish at university. But I do think it's relevant, right? Because one of the things we've got to do in policy, particularly in this industry, I think is we've got to translate some of the kind of the more technical things that are happening, the innovations, and we've got to talk to policymakers, and we've got to meet them where we are. And I think narratives are a huge part of that. So we can have technical conversations with regulators, we can kind of talk about this and that article of MiCA and other things. But if we ultimately want to get things done, if we want to see kind of like prioritization of these topics, we've got to convince policymakers that this is real, and we've also got to convince the public as well. So look, there are narratives out there that we have to combat. There's narratives around, fraud and scams. A narrative I get a lot is that blockchains are good, but tokens are bad, or all unbacked crypto is kind of worthless, but backed crypto is good. And look, I think we just need to all work together to deliver simple messages, to try and translate the kind of the technical potential that we all see into kind of narrative to try and create that prioritization. So, hopefully that's helpful.
Totally on the same page. I do agree, especially if your job is related to bridging different communities, and you are exactly that, like crypto community with policymakers. And next question is actually about these two communities that, in my opinion, I've also been in crypto for like almost 8 years. And I've seen that in the beginning we were like, crypto was, okay, we'll revolutionize everything, like we'll basically kill the existing incumbent system and create a new one. And the policy making was not yet there at all. So it was like this. Now it's more balanced, right? With the MiCA deadline approaching, with the current bull run, with the US elections that has filled the news space recently, what is the current vibe in these two communities that you bridge? How do you feel the current dynamics?
Look, it's a great question. I think we're at a really interesting time now, right? I actually think the beginning of this year was quite slow. So in my job at Coinbase, I cover international, which is everything outside the US. So we focus a lot on Europe and the UK, but also Asia and the Americas. And there were a number of jurisdictions that the team were focused on where actually not much was happening, right? Where actually things were getting a little bit stuck. We were waiting for consultation papers. We were waiting for other things. I will say, obviously, the ETF in the US was a big kind of moment. I think there was a really interesting moment from Basel where they produced this Finternet paper talking about the future of finance being tokens and ledgers. I mean, this was a great moment for us in this industry to see that the TradFi kind of guys see that, albeit with a slightly different slant we can kind of get into. But then we've been building up, and I think the vibe now, everyone's got a spring in their step after the US elections and the price action in the market, right? And so the two, so I think in the industry we feel good. I think we feel positive. But as I think, to go back to the earlier part of your question, I think policymakers and the industry, I think we are coming together. I think we're turning the page on like a version of crypto, which was maybe a bit more of a kind of a libertarian ethos. We don't need the regulation so much. It's about personal empowerment. All of that is incredibly important, and I think we have to hold on to that. But I think there's a growing maturation, kind of maturing of the business, and a realization that this world of tech is entering this highly regulated financial services space. And so I think the bridge between the two is getting a little shorter, and I think that's helping the dialogue and helping to push forward the legislative program.
This is very interesting. Do you think that this trend is consistent across regions? You are traveling quite a lot and you see different communities. And I think, well, we always tend to be a little bit biased to what the framework where we live. Do you see any divergences?
Yeah, gosh, big question. Look, I do see divergences. Look, I think if you really abstract it to the very top level, it feels like most jurisdictions are on a journey where, you know, you start with a basic form of kind of tax, kind of like, you know, regulation applicable. You maybe move into AML. Those are the two first steps. The next step is then some form of kind of crypto kind of licensing framework for centralized actors. Then you start thinking about DeFi and other things. So a lot of the countries that we go to and talk to, they're somewhere on that journey. But there are definitely differences that you see. I was kind of fascinated to listen to the previous panel and hear about sub-Saharan Africa and the UNICEF stories, because for me what's so exciting is when you go to some of these countries where they've had double-digit inflation for kind of many years. So I was in Buenos Aires recently, and you know, you don't have to go there and tell them that having a digitally available kind of store of value or access to a digital US dollar is a good thing. Like, they 100% get it, and they're all using the technology. And so the conversation then is kind of how do you regulate it and move forwards. There are other markets where it's more developed and the focus is more fraud and scams. So look, I think there's a huge spectrum, and inevitably we're going to see divergences. I mean, I would love, someone said it on the previous panel, I would love for us to have a globally harmonized framework, particularly Coinbase. We're a kind of global actor and we're present in many different markets. I think we'll get there, but I think we have to be realistic in our aspirations, and I think total convergence is probably a goal that we're not going to attain in the short term.
So which term are we talking about here? So you think that we will reach this united framework? How much time
well, look,
do you think
I mean,
we need?
you know, the G20 has done a lot of work, so is IOSCO. They've got kind of principles, and I think there will be, you know, a process where people will converge towards those principles, but they're pretty high level, right? And different countries have different concerns and issues, and will rightly tailor some of those rules to the kind of the specificities they see in the market. But I do hope that maybe in a year or two's time, when most of the G20 have kind of done round one, maybe we can kind of then look at that and say, hey, you know, what works, what doesn't, and how do we converge even more? I mean, it would be nice to live in a world where there are kind of substituted compliance or equivalence frameworks and these types of things, but I think, you know, that's for the next step. We're quite early in that conversation.
So what's the role of MiCA in this long-term development? Do you see that this is considered an example, a template in different regions? Do you think that some of the regions take like a separate stance, and what are the basic prerequisites for that decision?
Yeah, I'm sure others have said it. I mean, MiCA is definitely a template. I mean, the Commission deserves credit. I think the co-legislators deserve a huge amount of credit because they had to think about MiCA years and years ago. I think they first started in 2017, 2018. Libra, I think, had a kind of a useful impetus to kind of get that conversation going. But it is a comprehensive, I would say for us at Coinbase, this is the most comprehensive framework that we see. It's probably the hardest thing we have to do, and I think if it's hard for us, that suggests it's kind of hard for others too. And, so it's a template, it's very comprehensive. Others are looking at it. I know it was a bit of an inspiration for some of the work they did at IOSCO and for those conversations. It'll be very interesting to see what the US does. So we might get onto that in a second, but it could well be that we see stablecoin and market structure legislation within 12 months in the US, and to what extent, they pick up, particularly in the market structure bill, and actually also in stablecoins, some of the rules and requirements they have in MiCA will be very interesting to see. I think the UK will do something similar to MiCA. Some folks on the previous panel talked about second mover advantage. It's kind of second mover advantage, but equally, there are some things that weren't a thing when MiCA was written. So staking, we hadn't had the merge yet, and so staking was quite niche, and so staking is not referred to explicitly in MiCA, nor DeFi and some of these other things. So these regulations will, I think, use MiCA as a source of inspiration, but they will also kind of update to take advantage of kind of developments in the market.
So a second pass, let's delve into the US regulations a little bit. I think there has been a lot of hype around what is happening because there is this opportunity for change that is now considered a good thing for crypto in the US. How you think this hope can be actually fulfilled? And do you think that this volatility also in approaches and in this hype is actually a good opportunity for the whole crypto industry if we talk about this united framework, not regional ones, but the one that long-term is developing towards something bigger than just regions?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's exciting what's happening in the US, right? I think for a long time everybody knew there was almost an internal conversation between regulators in the US with regard to these tokens being either commodities, in which case they would fall under the CFTC, or are they securities under the SEC? And it was very difficult to move forward. It was very difficult for the industry to understand how to get regulated. And I think now what we're seeing is, crypto was a topic in the election. Actually, it was bipartisan. Both kind of presidential candidates were talking about it. We had a bipartisan vote for something called FIT21, which was market structure legislation in the US. I think we had 71 Dems vote for that. So I think we've now got the most pro-crypto bipartisan Congress that we've ever had. And I think in the White House, we've got obviously a very pro-crypto kind of president-elect. Likely we're going to see a change of the SEC pretty soon. I guess that will happen in kind of mid-January. And then who knows, right? It's going to be hard to predict the precise timelines. But as I said before, I think there is a good chance that the US does move forward quite fast with stablecoin and market structure registration. But to bring this back to Europe and to bring it to MiCA, look, I think it does have an impact. I was actually in, coming to Europe in a second, but I was in Australia a week and a half ago. And suddenly, these topics were front page news because I think they realized that the US is such a big economy. In some senses, they've been dragging their feet on that, which has had an impact on many other countries. And I think that now the US is moving, I think that's an impulse for others to consider what they're doing. I think in Europe, we should really think about how do we capitalize on the advantage we've got, right? So we have this framework, we're implementing it right now. How do we then commercialize it, right? Because I think Europe is good at regulating, and I think we've got to get better at innovating. And we've got to start changing the narrative and thinking about, blockchain as this horizontal enabling technology, not just financial services, but multiple different use cases. How can we contribute to the competitiveness agenda, the growth agenda we've got here? Should we have a digital capital markets union? So I think there's now that the US is playing, now that the US is going to be playing catch up and fast catch up, I think it's actually a really good moment to reflect and to use that kind of energy to kind of push forward also in this region and capitalize on the advantage that we have from the MiCA framework, which sets out that really helpful regulatory clarity that we've been asking for.
Between short-term and long-term, what do you think is the next big thing in the international regulation framework? And is it also related to the advent of new tech, namely AI? And what about the convergence between blockchain and AI?
Okay, good question. I thought they answered this really nicely actually on the previous panel.
Taking the example of the last.
Taking a bit of a kind of leaf out of that book. So I used to walk into a lot of kind of policy rooms and they would talk about AI and they would talk about blockchain, and these would be kind of two separate, different conversations. In actual fact, I think they're beginning to come together, and we're telling that narrative of blockchain plus AI. And in actual fact, we live in a world of a cluster of these kind of like super technologies, including cloud and quantum and Internet of Things, that actually don't work in isolation, but they all kind of work synergistically. And so for us, we see two big things with regard to blockchain and AI. One, which was touched on the previous panel, is the way in which blockchains can help to scale trust. So we sometimes say that AI scales content, but blockchain scales trust. And so we need to kind of trust what comes out of an AI. We're not going to understand it, but data provenance and data authentication is an area where I think we're going to see kind of blockchains play a really important role. So, immutable kind of like ledgers, storing photographs that haven't been tampered with and articles and things like that, and using blockchains as a kind of input into LLMs, I think is going to help us have more trust with what comes out. So I think that kind of provenance of data and authentication is a big one. There's a new one, it may not be for some of the more kind of tech advanced in the audience, is this agentic AI topic. So we've got these AI agents, and more, we're not just going to be asking AI to do our homework and tell us what flight to catch, but to actually go out and execute and transact. So book the restaurant, pay the deposit, do X and Y. And our view at Coinbase is that these agents are going to be using wallets, and they're going to be using tokens and crypto in order to execute on those transactions. And we've already pioneered a few really interesting kind of like pilots in that space. And we have a toolkit that allows people to just spin up an AI agent, open a crypto wallet, and then just start doing real things. And in a world in which AI bots are going to struggle with KYC, I think crypto is going to have a big role there. I actually read last night there's a company developing KYA, which is Know Your Agent. Anyway, so this might be an acronym that we hear more about. But
I thought Know Your AI.
Know Your AI, yeah. So it's not just Know Your Transaction KYT or KYC. It could be KYA now. Can I step back to the start of your question, which was about other big things that are coming ahead in the policy kind of space? Because I do think a big conversation that we see more and more of, and I wonder if it resonates here, is this kind of recognition in TradFi that I talked about before, that ledgers and tokens can be helpful to update the financial service system and financial market infrastructure. It's a good thing, but I think there's a school of thought around, should this innovation be used on like a single ledger? Should the kind of settlement assets just be some form of central bank kind of like money? Should we just be focused on permission systems? And obviously another school of thought which is focused on broad, kind of innovation-friendly, neutral, permissionless networks, more of a use of stable coins because of the kind of programmability, et cetera. And so this kind of permission versus permissionless, I think that's a really big debate, and probably will be a debate which it won't be black and white. We'll probably see a future, or we advocate for at least consideration of a future where you have these permissionless networks as a base layer, and then you can kind of build permissioning and KYC and other things on top. There was actually kudos to the European Commission. There was a terrific report that came out just last week, which was building financial market infrastructure on permissionless blockchains from the Commission, which is well worth a read if you haven't already seen that.
Let me get back a little bit to what you said about blockchain building trust. But we are also here building trust in blockchain, right? And your role is pretty big in this. In this room, we do not need to build this trust. But outside of this room, there is so much yet to be done. Can you delve a little bit into your initiatives, like your personal and Coinbase initiatives, on how you build this trust, how you stand with crypto, how you push this agenda, how you fight the skepticism?
Yeah, happy to. I sometimes think the best advocates for our industry and the people that help us to build the trust are the entrepreneurs themselves. And again, this came up on the previous panel, this whole bottom, we've got this kind of, we can talk at the top and we can have top down, but we need to have bottoms up. So the best way of building trust we found is to get the community, to activate the community and amplify and shine a spotlight on some of those great use cases of people in different communities, up and down different countries, innovating and building use cases, real world kind of use cases, solving problems, employing people, et cetera, using blockchain, using Web3. So we have this kind of community-driven umbrella group, which we call Stand With Crypto. It played a big role in the US. I think as many of you will have seen, we've launched it in the UK. I can see some of the partners in the room here. So this is very much a community-driven thing. But what we try and do is we try and use Stand with Crypto to bring entrepreneurs, get them to tell the stories, and then use the platform to amplify that. And again, it's a way of making Web3 and blockchain more relatable, and to try and introduce policymakers to people who maybe in their constituency or may vote for them one day who care about this. And we did an event actually in the UK Parliament last week, which was great. And again, for me, the best moment was not necessarily the minister standing up and speaking, but it was this young lady who was an Olympian. I think she was a long jumper, and she wasn't funded to go to the Olympic Games. And the way she worked out that she could fund herself was to kind of put some of her training data on the blockchain, right? And then to kind of like then monetize access to some of her kind of training data and stuff. And people were super interested in her diet and what she got up to. And so she was using Web3 as a way of funding herself to get the Olympic Games. And it was just this brilliant story. And when she stood up, it just was captivating. And I think that's how we build trust in this industry. We can talk about layer 2 scaling, we can talk about MiCA this and that, but let's talk about kind of real world utility. And I'm really excited that we're moving more towards utility to kind of counterbalance the speculation. The speculation is good and it's helpful and we need it and we'll stay, but we need some utility as well.
Like it a lot. Do we have any questions in the room? Pretty sure we have.
They just want their coffee.
Yeah, I know. Okay, there will be questions during coffee, but let me end up on this. This is fireside chat, so like rapid fire questions. Innovation or stability?
Innovation. Stability of the graveyard, I don't like. Is this rapid fire? Yeah.
Restrictions or incentives?
Incentives.
Financial inclusion or profit?
No, I'm going with financial inclusion. Right?
You can develop a little bit on this. Yes.
No. Yeah, look, I joined Coinbase because of the mission. The mission is about economic freedom. It's about using these tools genuinely to update the financial system. I love the fact that we can send money around the world now using a WhatsApp text message. It costs less than a cent. It arrives in a second. The traditional banking system is working to try and settle cross-border transactions, 75% of them within 1 hour. Like, we can do that. I think remittances play such an important role in the developing world. We can, with 6.5% average fees, we can kind of take that down to a total fraction of it. I think democratizing access to finance through fractionalization, through tokenizing real-world assets, in a world of inflation, having people being able to take a stake in real assets using kind of blockchains and making that more accessible. There are just tons of reasons why I'm genuinely very motivated and excited by the kind of the inclusion, the economic freedom part of it. So that for me is an easy question.
With MiCA deadline approaching, let's a little bit bridge it to the financial inclusion topic. And there are outstanding challenges for crypto firms, but there is this final value that is financial inclusion, that is common to all the crypto initiatives, right? At least it must be. So how do you see the overcoming of these challenges approaching this idea of financial inclusion, and what is the role of MiCA for doing this?
That's a hard one. There definitely are some challenges, right? As MiCA looms, very excited about it, very forward-looking kind of framework. But it's difficult, and whether it's the stablecoin rules or whether it's the disclosures or whether it's the overlap with PSD, I think there's a bunch of things that we're all kind of trying to figure through. And I think we're grateful for the engagement and collaboration with the ESAs and with the Commission and with the NCAs too. This is going to be a bit of an iterative kind of process as we kind of work it through. But then I think once we have MiCA, then hopefully that fades a bit into the background, right? So people will then, I hope, recognize that there's kind of this regulatory clarity and then start to innovate and build on blockchains and to build some of these Web3 decentralized applications and do things in a different way, do things cheaper, do things faster, do things better. And I think if we're able to do that and transform payments and slowly bring capital markets and financial assets on chain, we're going to lower the cost of finance, and I think that's going to be great for financial inclusion, great for SMEs. And I also think it's maybe a way in which we can tackle some of these kind of intractable problems here around kind of growth and fragmentation. So I'm excited about that. The other thing that often a bigger idea in Europe is around GDPR. I feel like in Europe there's a really sensible impulse and concern around personal data, who's using your data on the internet, who's monetizing it, where does it go? And I think that there's a narrative around Web3 and how Web3 actually empowers the individual to kind of monetize their own data, control their own data, have agency over it. And I think that's a really interesting story to unpack in Europe as well. And I feel like that should be followed up.
I like how we started with narratives and we ended up with narratives passing through utility, trust, and creation of bridges in order to create good stories that resonate with different communities. Thank you so much, Tom. I think now it's time for coffee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.